What I think needs to change, if we can fix this correctly in Africa, and why Africa? Africa is 1 billion people. China and India put together about 3. If you add China, India, and Africa together, that's 4 out of 8. If we can't get those, and those 4, China's done pretty well. India hopes to do even better. But Africa doesn't know what it wants to be. It hasn't had a chance to do that yet. As 600 million people out of the 1 billion plus in Africa do not have access to electricity. And I don't mean 2 hours a day. I mean none. So when you fly over the continent at night, and you're not in Malawi on a bike, but you're flying over it, look down, it's dark. It's not dark because there aren't people. It's dark because they're living the way their forefathers and their forefathers' lived. They have no electricity. And if you don't have electricity, around the world, everybody's talking about AI and data and the power of digital. How do you plan to charge your phone like that? It doesn't work. You have to have basic power, basic electricity, basic connectivity, basic capability to get a fiber optic cable with a cell phone tower, things that matter, which we take for granted in every other place. So you need some basics, whether those basics are infrastructure of this type, or drinking water that's available, or healthcare that's delivered in a way. You need basic infrastructure. But those are what we began to talk about. But then what you need beyond that, and I think this is really, it's even after Davos, this has become more of a challenge for me. I started talking about it in Davos and panels. Currently, it consumes me. 1.2 billion young people in the global south. I don't like the term because it's like weird. It's a weird way of discussing countries, but the emerging markets, 1.2 billion people, will become eligible for a job in the coming 10 to 12 years in those countries. Currently, those countries are on a forecasted likely generation of jobs of between 400 and 450 million. It's a good number, but it's 800 million short of 1.2 billion. So effectively, 2 out of 3 kids have no hope for a job in the coming 12 years in those countries. So now when you're a young person growing up and you talk about a demographic dividend, which is how in the West we talk about this for others, it's not a demographic dividend if you don't get clean air and clean water when you're growing up and a job when you're ready. So how do you get jobs in Africa? I would say there are 5 verticals that matter, all of which connect to the kind of work you guys do. The first one is basically providing electricity. If you provide electricity, the generation, transmission, and distribution, of course, creates jobs. But the biggest job you create is what electricity enables at the end, which is, factories to be opened, digital content to be created, the things that we take for granted while creating jobs. The second is other infrastructure, physical infrastructure, bridges, roads, airports. But what really is interesting is railroad. There are very few railroad connectivities in Africa. So when you want to move, let's say you want to mine rare earths in Zambia, and you want to bring them not just mined as in raw material, but after some value-added manufacturing. So you do it the right way. You now want to bring it out to Durban in South Africa to put it on a ship to bring it to Europe or the US or China or India or wherever it's going. That's a 42-day transit by road. 42 days. If you had a railroad, it would be 40 hours. 42 days versus 40 hours is one thing for rare earths. Now let's convert that to food. And it's not going to work. So the continent of Africa, and this is the third part, is agriculture as a business. The continent of Africa has plenty of arable land and plenty of drinking water, but no irrigation. Only 6% of Africa is irrigated, and their output per hectare is 1/3 that of the rest of the world because they don't use fertilizers, and when they do, they use the wrong ones because they don't have soil testing stations. To be completely clear, a soil testing station can be put up on these 2 chairs put together. That's what it takes. They don't have that. So you've got a place that is food stressed that could become food surplus and could provide food to other countries in Africa if they had railroads and warehouses with cold chains and so on, none of which they have. So that's the second and third opportunity. The fourth is healthcare, not just because I want you to be healthier, but because if you do it through primary health centers, you will create jobs for nurses, medical technicians, doctors, PPE manufacturing, vaccine manufacturing, and most importantly, you'll create a diagnostic network so you can catch the next pandemic before it erupts in your face, which today we don't have. So that's the fourth one. And the fifth one is tourism. The real tourism possibilities in Africa are boundless. They have every possible attraction for people like us who like traveling, not just for a backpacker serving time between his duty in the Israeli army, which I suspect is what he was doing, because they go to 2 or 3 countries. One of those is India, some are in Africa, and I kind of have friends from that time whom I got to know, who are now 65 years old like me, which is interesting. And but also because you have water, beaches, sports, mountains, culture, food, and wildlife. You could make Africa a incredibly powerful, ecologically sensitive tourism place and create multiples of jobs. Every dollar invested in tourism creates 10 jobs for every dollar invested in manufacturing. Now, they're not the same quality of job, but if you're in Africa, it's very easy for a Western person to pontificate about good jobs versus bad jobs. Kind of a job is kind of important. And so just think this through, these 5 verticals, and think of the power of these. The public sector, governments, multilateral banks with our leverage, we can only do some part of this. The only way you'll get trillions to work is by getting the private sector to see a rational return on their money invested in these 5 verticals. That's our task. Find a way to make people understand the criticality of this problem through data that is irrefutable. Find a way to raise that to the right level of social consciousness through partners who know how to do it. And then find a way to get the private sector to bring its money to play. People like you, people like BlackRock, people like Scottish Widows and Ontario Teachers Pension Plan, and solar farm operators, and the Tatas in India, and all these guys, and make them think about the opportunities in the emerging markets to change the course of history.